The sun rose lazily over the dusty town of Aketi, casting long shadows over the corrugated rooftops and red earth paths. Roosters crowed in stubborn unison while women fetched water in bright wrappers, balancing plastic buckets on their heads like crowns. It was a typical morning in the heart of eastern Nigeria, where time moved with the rhythm of old drums and people carried stories in their bones. In the compound of Chief Ezenna, the air smelled of bread, charcoal, and new beginnings. The compound was large, with 3 main buildings circling a central courtyard. In one of those buildings lived Chuka, the younger of Ezenna's 2 sons. Chuka was 24, tall, wiry, with skin the color of roasted cashew and a smile that could melt iron. But beneath that smile was something else, something unspoken. People in Aketi often said, Chuka is sharp, but sometimes a knife that cuts too deep leaves scars. He was quick with his mouth, always the first to joke, the last to apologize. He had charm, yes. But charm is not character. His elder brother, Obinna, was his opposite. At 32, Obinna was a quiet man who had worked his way up from a local mechanic's apprentice to owning one of the most trusted auto shops in 3 towns. He was respected, not just for his skill, but for his honesty. While Chuka chased girls and dreams that changed every month, Obinna built his life brick by brick. Obinna's wife, Adaora, was the jewel of the family. Graceful, intelligent, and warm-hearted, she taught at the local primary school and volunteered on weekends at the health center. Her laughter often filled the compound, and her kindness was the oil that kept the Ezenna family from friction. She and Obinna had been married for 4 years, and though they had no children yet, their love was the kind that made others believe in marriage. Chuka often watched them. He would sit on the steps at night, pretending to scroll through his phone, while his eyes followed Adaora as she moved from kitchen to bedroom, or when she returned from school, dusting chalk off her hips, smiling with her whole face. He never said anything. Not out loud. But something inside him twisted every time he saw them together. It began with small things. A compliment that lingered too long. A joke that made Adaora shift uncomfortably. Once, he brought her fried plantain from the market, wrapped in newspaper. Just saw it and thought of you, he said with that lazy smile. Adaora took it with a polite nod. Thank you, Chuka. You're welcome, my wife, he added, laughing. She didn't laugh. Still, she didn't tell Obinna. She chalked it up to Chuka being Chuka, always pushing lines for attention. But what she didn't know was that some lines, once crossed, don't disappear. They burn. The day everything changed was a Thursday. Obinna had traveled to Enugu to pick up car parts and would be gone overnight. The compound felt quieter than usual. Adaora had come home early from school with a headache. She greeted Chuka briefly in the courtyard, not noticing the way his eyes lingered as she entered her flat. Rain started falling by evening. Soft at first, then heavier, a thunderous downpour that turned the earth into soup. Power went out as it often did and the compound was swallowed in shadows and the sound of falling water. Adaora was lying on the couch, wrapped in a thin wrapper, eyes closed by, listening to the rain. She didn't hear the door creak open. She didn't see him enter. What happened next was not a moment. It was a crack in the earth, a ripping of trust, of safety, of soul. When she screamed, it was into the rain. When he left, it was into the silence. The morning after smelled like wet leaves and broken things. Adaora sat on the edge of her bed, wrapped in a wrapper that now felt too thin, too revealing. Her eyes were swollen, her lips cracked. The silence in the room was loud, so loud it made her want to scream. But she couldn't. Her voice had buried itself in her chest. Her fingers trembled as she held onto her phone, hovering over Obinna's number, then pulling away. She didn't know what to say. How do you tell your husband that his own brother has done the unspeakable? Chuka was nowhere to be seen. He had left early, before sunrise, saying he had errands in town. He wore the same arrogant grin he always did, but beneath it was something darker, heavier. Guilt. No. Guilt is a gift of the righteous. Chuka felt something else. Panic, maybe. Or just fear of being found out. By noon, Adaora still hadn't said anything to anyone. She washed her face, tied her hair, and walked to the health center. There, she asked to speak privately with Nurse Ngozi. She said little. Only what was necessary. Her voice shook, and Ngozi's face fell slowly as she listened. The nurse didn't ask too many questions. She knew Adaora. Knew she wasn't the type to make up things. She ran tests quietly, respectfully, and gave her painkillers, water, and a place to sit. You have to tell someone, she said gently. Adaora looked out the window. I can't, not yet. Don't let silence protect evil, Ngozi said. Let your words set you free. Adaora nodded, but her heart felt like it was chained to a stone. That night, when Obinna returned from Enugu, she kissed him softly on the cheek and served him his food. She didn't eat. She said she had a stomachache. He didn't press. Chuka returned home later that night and pretended like nothing had happened. He cracked jokes in the courtyard, talked loudly on the phone, and even asked Adaora if there was any leftover soup. She said nothing. Her face was blank. She simply walked into her room and locked the door. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. But silence, like smoke, always finds a way to rise. One evening, Obinna returned from the workshop and found Adaora crying quietly on their bed. Her back was to him. He sat beside her and put a hand on her shoulder. My love, what is it? She didn't respond. Talk to me. She turned slowly, her eyes hollow, her voice barely above a whisper. Something happened. When she told him, Obinna didn't move. He sat perfectly still, as if his entire body had gone numb. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just stared at the wall. The name she spoke burned into his ears. Chuka. His own blood. The next morning, Obinna confronted Chuka in the courtyard. There were no other family members around. Only a few neighbors stood at a distance, sensing tension in the air. You entered my house and touched my wife, Obinna said, his voice cold, quiet, controlled. Chuka looked up, surprised but defiant. What is she telling you? Obinna, she's lying. She. Before he could finish, Obinna punched him square in the jaw. Chuka fell hard, grabbing his mouth. Blood mixed with red dust. I took care of you. I trusted you, Obinna growled, shaking. You are no brother of mine. Neighbors gathered, murmuring. Chuka wiped his mouth and spat. You want to believe her over me? Your own brother. Obinna didn't respond. He turned and walked away, but the entire town had already had enough. Word spread fast in Aketi. By evening, the elders had called a family meeting. Chief Ezenna sat at the head, his face dark with shame. Adaora sat beside Obinna, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Chuka stood on the other side, arms crossed, jaw still bruised. Ezenna cleared his throat. I raised you both with discipline. With honor. Chuka, tell me now, before the spirits of our ancestors, did you commit this evil? Chuka looked around the room. His mother sat in the corner, weeping quietly. Adaora refused to meet his eyes. I didn't, he said. I swear it. Ezenna sighed. Then he stood. Then you will swear before the shrine. Chuka flinched. In Aketi, if a man refused to swear before the ancestral shrine, it was seen as a silent confession. I don't need to go that far, Chuka said, stepping back. You all have already judged me. Young man, said Elder Madu, the oldest man in the clan, you will either face the gods, or we will know you as guilty. That night, Chuka disappeared. He didn't come home. He didn't say goodbye. He simply vanished. Some said he fled to Port Harcourt. Others claimed he crossed the border into Cameroon. But Adaora didn't care. His absence was not relief, it was emptiness. Months passed. Adaora began to rebuild her life. Obinna grew quiet and distant. Their marriage, though intact, was scarred. They attended counseling, tried to find joy again. But some wounds heal slow. One day, word came that Chuka had been seen, homeless, in Onitsha, begging at motor parks. He had no money, no friends, no peace. He was drinking. He was coughing blood. He was alone. Obinna went there once, just to see. He stood across the road and watched his brother slump against a tree, his clothes torn, his eyes empty. Chuka didn't see him. Obinna didn't approach. He just turned around and went home. Justice did not come through courts or prison bars, but it came. And in the silence of night, when the wind whispered through the mango trees, people in Aketi would say, some sins carry their own punishment. You don't have to lift a hand. The ancestors will handle it. Life in Aketi moved on, but not unchanged. The Ezenna compound was no longer the heart of joy it once was. Obinna became quieter by the day. He still ran his auto mechanic business, but the light had gone out in his eyes. Adaora, too, returned to teaching, but she avoided places where too many eyes gathered. The whispers in the market, the stares in church, the way some women reached for their wrappers when she passed, all of it was exhausting. But worst of all were the ones who didn't believe her. She probably seduced him, one woman whispered in the market store. She's just embarrassed her husband found out, said another. Adaora heard. Always. Even when they spoke low. She held her head high, but when she got home, she cried alone. Chief Ezenna couldn't bear the shame. He stopped attending community meetings. He resigned from his position on the local council. He walked hunched now, a proud man bent by disgrace. One day, Adaora found herself in the town's abandoned shrine, an old play structure near the edge of the forest, now home only to spiders and dust. She sat on the altar, where people once knelt before the gods, and whispered a single prayer. Let truth fight for me. Chuka's life in Onitsha was a punishment with no name. His days blurred, alcohol, hunger, shouting at ghosts only he could see. He tried to stay with old friends, but one by one, they pushed him away. I can't have that kind of spirit in my house, said his cousin Chinedu. He lived in a back alley behind a printing press, begging for coins near bus stations. The scars on his face from street fights and infections became permanent. And the dreams, those were the worst. Every night, he saw Adaora's face. Not crying. Just looking at him. As if waiting. Sometimes he'd scream her name into the night. Other times, he woke up choking, as though someone sat on his chest. One rainy morning, he collapsed near the River Niger bridge. A woman selling oranges called an ambulance, but he refused to go. He just lay there, soaked and shaking. Back home in Aketi, Mama Ezenna, aged and weary, wrote a letter with trembling hands. My son, wherever you are, know that I still love you. But love does not erase wrongdoing. I pray you find peace, not from the world, but from your own spirit. Come home. Face your shame. Let the gods judge you if men cannot. A mother's tears can't cleanse your sin. Only truth can. She folded it, gave it to a cousin in Onitsha, and prayed. One night, Obinna came home from work and stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Adaora chop onions. He hadn't touched her in weeks. They shared a bed like strangers. She noticed him and stopped. What is it? She asked. He walked in slowly, then knelt before her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He cried. For the first time since the confession. Deep, helpless sobs that shook her. I should have protected you, he said. She held his head, tears falling silently. You still can. That night, they talked for hours. Not just about Chuka. About their lives. About healing. About the pain that still sat like stone in their hearts. Almost a year after the incident, during Harmattan when dust crawled through streets like spirits, Chuka returned. Skinny. Sickly. Hair unkempt. Eyes sunken. He walked into the Ezenna compound barefoot, shaking. Neighbors came out. Some shouted. Some spat. Mama Ezenna ran out, screamed when she saw him, and fainted. Obinna walked slowly from the workshop, his hands oil-stained. He looked at his brother for a long time. Chuka tried to speak. Obinna raised a hand. No words. Go to the elders. This time, the council didn't meet in a room. They met beneath the Iroko tree, the traditional site of justice. Chuka was asked again, do you deny it? He didn't speak. Will you take the oath before the gods? He shook his head. Then Elder Madu stood and spoke, a man who fears truth has already been judged. It was declared that Chuka was to be ostracized. He would not be buried in Aketi. No family would speak for him. No bride would marry him. If he died, his body would be burned, not buried, and his name would be erased from the family tree. He was no longer Ezenna's son. Chuka left the village that same day. No one helped him pack. No one looked him in the eye. That night, he wandered into the bush, drunk and mumbling. They found his body 2 days later near the base of a hill. He had fallen, or perhaps thrown himself, off a rocky edge. His skull was cracked, his bones shattered. There was no funeral. No grave. Only a small fire, lit in the bush. The wind carried the ash away. Adaora and Obinna moved to Enugu, started afresh. They adopted 2 children. Adaora became a counselor for victims of abuse. Obinna opened a second workshop and taught young men not just how to fix cars, but how to live with honor. People in Aketi still told the story. Not as gossip, but as a warning. Let no man wear the face of a brother while carrying the heart of a beast. And if you pass the shrine at night, some say you could still hear footsteps in the dust, and a voice whispering, I should not have crossed that line. The Ezenna compound had always been a place where laughter lived. But after Chuka's banishment and death, a heavy spirit hung in the air like harmattan fog. The mango trees in the courtyard stopped bearing fruit for a whole season. The goats gave fewer kids. The chickens, once plump and full of life, began to die mysteriously. Elder Madu came to the house one morning with his walking stick and a message from the spiritual custodians of the land. You must cleanse this ground, he said to Chief Ezenna, who sat staring into the fire. The earth remembers what happened here. A spiritual cleansing was held. Drummers came. A priestess from Omodioka led a ritual with palm fronds, white chalk, and bitter cola. She sang in tongues older than memory. The townspeople watched from afar as the land was purified with fire, water, and sacrifice. But even after the ritual, the air never returned to what it once was. Mama Ezenna never recovered from her son's shame. Not because she didn't believe the truth, but because she loved both of her sons, and losing one felt like being split in two. She stopped cooking, she stopped singing to her grandchildren. She would sit under the Udola tree and whisper Chuka's name, as though trying to call back his innocence from the past. One night, she collapsed in her room. The doctor said it was her heart. She held in too much sorrow, Adaora whispered when she heard the news. Some mothers don't cry out loud. They cry inside. They buried her beside her own mother, in the old part of the village, far from Chuka's memory. At her burial, Adaora knelt beside her grave and placed a piece of white cloth on the soil. Rest now. The storm has passed. In Enugu, Adaora and Obinna's life was slow to rebuild. They moved into a modest bungalow near Thinker's Corner and lived quietly. Adaora joined a local women's support group. Every Friday, she sat in a circle with women who had faced different types of betrayal, some from strangers, others from family. She shared her story for the first time one rainy evening. Her voice cracked, but she did not stop. The women cried with her. They hugged her. And for the first time in a long time, Adaora felt her breath deepen. Obinna, on his part, began visiting secondary schools, speaking to boys about consent, about honor, about the sacred duty of protecting, not preying on, the vulnerable. I lost a brother because no one taught him where the line was, he told a hall of students one day. That silence destroyed more than one life. 3 years after Chuka's death, Adaora returned to Aketi with Obinna. Not for a funeral. Not for a family meeting. She returned to the abandoned shrine. The red clay walls had faded. Vines now crept over the roof. Lizards darted across the altar. She knelt, alone. I forgive you, she whispered. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to let go. Old women in Aketi now tell the story to young brides, not to frighten them, but to give them voice. Fathers tell their sons, be a protector, never a predator. Elder Madu recorded the story into the village's oral archive, under the title, The Brother Who Crossed the Line. It was told not as gossip, but as a sacred caution. That in every family lies the power to either protect or destroy. The pain did not vanish. But it found its place. Like a scar, it didn't disappear, but it stopped bleeding. Obinna and Adaora adopted a baby girl and named her Chimamanda, meaning, "My God will never fail." Every time she laughed, it was a reminder that even after a storm, light still finds a way to fall. And in the quiet corners of the world, justice walks, not always loud, not always fast, but always with purpose. Thanks for watching. Kindly like, comment and turn on the notification bell to get more interesting stories like this, and don't forget to subscribe.